The sharp click of handcuffs echoed on the rain-slicked highway, locking around the wrists of a man who usually moved through shadows and suppressed sniper fire. Chief Petty Officer Knox Whitaker had survived the deadliest valleys of Afghanistan, so the arrogant taunts of two small-town cops barely registered. They thought they had snagged an easy mark, a quiet man they had profiled on a lonely stretch of road late one night. But as Whitaker sat in the cramped cruiser, perfectly calm, he knew something they didn't. They hadn't arrested a nobody. They had illegally caged a Tier 1 Navy SEAL, and the entire United States military was about to make them pay. The rain turned the winding two-lane road into a treacherous mirror, reflecting the headlights of a lone Ford F-150. Behind the wheel sat Knox Whitaker, 32 years old, broad-shouldered and entirely at peace in the quiet isolation of the cab. He had been back stateside for only a few days, having just completed a grueling classified deployment with SEAL Team 6. His body was battered, carrying the invisible bruises of high-altitude jumps and the deep, marrow-deep exhaustion that only elite operators know. All he wanted was the warmth of his bed in his secluded cabin in Ashwood, a sleepy Virginia town a few hours' drive from the naval bases on the coast. He was driving exactly the speed limit, hands resting lightly on the wheel at the 10 and 2 position. The radio played a low, rhythmic jazz tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of rotor blades and gunfire that still echoed faintly in his memories. Suddenly, the interior of his truck was bathed in a violent, strobing wash of red and blue light. Knox's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A local Ashwood Police Department cruiser was riding his bumper close enough that he could see the aggressive posture of the driver. Knox let off the gas, signaled his intention, and smoothly pulled onto the gravel shoulder, bringing the truck to a gentle stop. He put the vehicle in park, turned off the engine, rolled down his window, and placed both hands firmly on top of the steering wheel. It was a practiced, deliberate series of movements designed to convey absolute compliance. In the cruiser, Officer Vance Harlan aggressively shoved his door open, stepping out into the drizzle. Harlan was a former high school linebacker who had traded his football jersey for a badge, bringing all his pent-up aggression and none of the discipline with him. His partner, Sergeant Rowan Briggs, a longtime veteran with a cynical streak and a habit of looking the other way when his junior officers crossed the line, followed at a slower, heavier pace. Unhooking the flashlight from his belt, Harlan approached the driver's side, his hand resting conspicuously on the butt of his service weapon. He shone the heavy maglite directly into Knox's eyes, a blinding beam meant to disorient and intimidate. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, Harlan snapped, his voice tight with unearned authority. Knox blinked through the glare, his voice calm, deep, and utterly devoid of fear. Good evening, officer. They're in the glove compartment. I will need to reach over to get them. Is that all right? Harlan sneered, leaning closer to the window. I didn't ask for a conversation, boy. I told you to hand them over. The racial microaggression, the deliberate use of the word boy, hung in the damp air. Knox's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his heart rate did not rise a single beat. He had been insulted by warlords and interrogated under mock capture scenarios by the best in the business. A power-tripping rookie cop was nothing. I am informing you of my movements so there are no misunderstandings, Knox replied evenly. He slowly reached across the cab, popped the glove box and retrieved the small leather wallet containing his documents. He handed them through the window. Harlan snatched them away, flashing the light over the Virginia driver's license. Dax Whitaker, Harlan read, butchering the pronunciation slightly, deliberately dragging out the syllables. What are you doing out here so late, Dax? I'm driving home. I live a few miles up the road on Creek Hollow. Is that right? Sergeant Briggs chimed in from the passenger side of the truck, shining his own light into the empty cab, looking for any excuse. A stray bottle, a suspicious package. Don't see a lot of your kind living up on Creek Hollow. Pretty expensive real estate. I saved my money, Knox said simply. Step out of the vehicle, Harlan commanded, taking a step back and unfastening the safety strap on his holster. Knox didn't move immediately. For what reason, officer? I was obeying the speed limit. My vehicle is in working order. I said step out of the damn vehicle, Harlan shouted, his temper flaring instantly at the perceived defiance. You match the description of a suspect involved in a break-in 2 towns over. Now get out before I drag you out. It was a blatant lie. Knox knew it. Briggs knew it. Harlan knew it. But on a dark, lonely road, the truth was whatever the men with the badges decided it was. I am stepping out of the vehicle, Knox stated. He opened the door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible, and stepped out into the rain. He stood at his full height, 6'2", built like a brick wall, possessing a coiled, lethal grace that was impossible to hide. Harlan took a reflexive half-step back, intimidated by Knox's sheer physical presence and overcompensating for his sudden spike of fear. Harlan lunged forward, grabbing Knox's arm roughly and spinning him around to face the truck. Hands on the roof. Spread your legs, Harlan barked. Knox complied, placing his palms flat against the cold, wet metal. He allowed Harlan to kick his legs apart. Harlan performed a rough, invasive pat-down, his hands lingering maliciously, searching for anything he could use. He found nothing but a wallet and a set of keys. Nothing on him, Vance, Briggs said lazily, leaning against the bed of the truck. Probably just write him a ticket for a cracked taillight, and let's go get coffee. No, Harlan said, his pride wounded by how unfazed Knox was. He's acting suspicious, too calm. I'm searching the vehicle. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, Knox said loudly and clearly, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. You have no probable cause. Harlan spun Knox around, shoving him back against the truck. I don't need your damn permission. You're a suspect in a felony burglary. Officer Harlan, Knox said, reading the name tag. If you search that vehicle without a warrant or a probable cause, you will be violating my Fourth Amendment rights. Furthermore, I advise you to look at the secondary ID in my wallet before you escalate this any further. Harlan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, you're a lawyer now. Let's see this magic ID. Harlan flipped open Knox's wallet, ignoring the driver's license, and pulled out the solid white card tucked behind it. It was a United States Uniformed Services Privilege and Identification Card, a military ID. Harlan squinted at it, then let out a scoff. Chief Petty Officer, Navy. Yeah, right. I've seen better fakes pulled off college freshmen trying to buy cheap beer. Now that is a federal identification card, Knox warned, his tone shifting from polite to a low, dangerous register. Confiscating or destroying it is a federal offense. Shut your mouth, Harlan yelled, his face turning red. In a fit of sheer arrogant stupidity, Harlan bent the military ID and tossed it onto the wet floorboard of his cruiser. You're under arrest for resisting a lawful order and suspicion of burglary. Put your hands behind your back. Knox stared at Harlan. He could break the officer's arm in 3 places before Briggs could even unholster his weapon. He could disable both men, take their keys, and be gone in seconds. The kinetic pathways fired in his brain, mapping out the tactical takedown. But he was a professional. He was a sworn defender of the Constitution. Even when its enforcers were failing it so miserably, escaping wasn't the mission. The mission was survival, and then accountability. Slowly, Knox brought his hands behind his back. Harlan slapped the steel cuffs on violently, ratcheting them down as tight as they could go, the metal biting painfully into Knox's wrists. Knox didn't wince. He didn't make a sound. He simply locked eyes with Harlan, an icy, dead calm stare that made the young officer's stomach suddenly twist with a strange, inexplicable dread. "Get in the car," Harlan muttered, shoving Knox toward the back of the cruiser. As Knox sat in the cramped, hard plastic back seat, the rain drumming on the roof, he took a slow, deep breath. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. They had taken his freedom. They had insulted his service, and they had laid hands on him. The karma was going to be biblical. The Ashwood Police Department was a relic of an earlier era, smelling strongly of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and old sweat. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a persistent, headache-inducing hum when Harlan and Briggs dragged Knox through the back doors and into the booking area. The night shift desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Vaughn, barely looked up from his computer screen. "What do we got, Vance?" Vaughn asked, stifling a yawn. "Caught a live one on the highway," Harlan boasted, shoving Knox toward the booking counter. "Matched the description of the Franklin House burglary. Got combative when I asked for his ID. Resisting arrest, failure to comply, and possession of a forged federal document." Vaughn paused his typing and looked up, his eyes sweeping over Knox. He noted the soaked clothes, the tight handcuffs, and the utterly impassive expression on the prisoner's face. "Forged federal document?" Briggs tossed Knox's wallet onto the counter along with the military ID Harlan had tossed into the cruiser earlier. "Kid had a fake Navy card. Says he's a chief petty officer. Look at him, Vaughn. Does he look like a Navy chief to you?" Vaughn picked up the ID card. He turned it over in his hands, squinting at the holographic overlay and the micro-printing. "I don't know, Vance. This looks pretty damn real to me. The chip is embedded, right? The ghost image." "It's a fake, Vaughn," Harlan insisted, stepping into Vaughn's space. "I bought fake IDs in college that look better. He's just some thug trying to use a stolen valor trick to get out of a ticket. Book him." Knox stood in silence. His wrists were throbbing where the metal cuffs had cut off circulation, his hands growing cold and numb. Yet his posture remained impeccable. Back straight, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He was employing a mental technique he had used during survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training, detaching his mind from his physical discomfort and observing the room as a sterile tactical environment. "Empty your pockets, tough guy," Harlan ordered, finally unlocking the handcuffs, only to immediately shove Knox against the counter. Knox methodically removed his watch, a heavy matte black tactical garment, his keys, and the loose change in his pockets. He placed them on the counter. "Take off your shoelaces and your belt," Vaughn instructed, going through the routine motions. As Knox unthreaded his belt, Briggs picked up the Garmin watch. "Nice piece of gear," the older cop muttered. "Probably stolen." "That watch was issued to me by Naval Special Warfare Command," Knox said, his voice echoing in the quiet booking room. It was the first time he had spoken since they arrived. The absolute certainty and authority in his voice made all three cops pause for a fraction of a second. Harlan recovered first, laughing mockingly. "Naval Special Warfare? What? You're a Navy SEAL now? First you're a chief, now you're a SEAL. What's next? You're an astronaut?" Knox didn't reply. He handed his belt and shoelaces to Vaughn. "Fingerprints and mugshot," Vaughn said, sighing. They ran him through the humiliating process. Knox allowed them to press his fingers onto the digital scanner. When he stood for the mugshot, holding the black board with his temporary booking number, he stared directly into the camera lens. He didn't scowl. He didn't look defeated. He looked through the lens, his eyes promising a reckoning. "Put him in cell 3. Harlan said, grabbing Knox by the bicep. Let him cool his heels until arraignment in the morning. Maybe a night on concrete will make him a little more talkative. Cell 3 was a 6x8 concrete box containing a stainless steel toilet and a metal bench bolted to the wall. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic clang that echoed down the cell block. Knox sat on the cold metal bench. The temperature in the cell was uncomfortably low and his clothes were still damp from the rain. He closed his eyes and began to control his breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, box breathing. Within minutes, his core temperature stabilized and his heart rate dropped to a steady resting rhythm. He thought about his commanding officer, Vice Admiral Garrett Sterling. Sterling was a man forged from pure iron, a legendary figure in the Spec Ops community who demanded absolute perfection from his men and offered absolute, unwavering loyalty in return. Sterling despised 2 things above all else: politicians who tied his operators' hands and anyone who disrespected the uniform. Knox waited until the morning shift change. A new deputy walked the line, handing out small, stale bologna sandwiches and tiny cartons of milk. I am permitted 1 phone call, Knox stated clearly to the young deputy. The deputy looked at his clipboard. Yeah, all right, come on. Knox was escorted to a wall-mounted phone in the hallway. He didn't call a civilian defense attorney. He didn't call a bail bondsman. He dialed a secure, unlisted number that routed directly to the Judge Advocate General's JAG office, attached to Naval Special Warfare Command in Virginia Beach. The line rang twice. JAG Command, duty officer speaking. This is Chief Petty Officer Knox Whitaker, designation Echo Sierra 7, Knox said, his voice a low murmur. I require legal assistance and command notification. I am currently being held at the Ashwood Municipal Police Department. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Chief Whitaker, can you repeat your location? Ashwood Police Department. I was arrested without probable cause during a traffic stop. They have confiscated my military identification and are holding me on fabricated charges of resisting arrest and burglary. Are you injured, Chief? Negative. But they have my gear, and they are refusing to acknowledge my status. Understood, Chief. The duty officer's voice hardened instantly, the casual tone replaced by razor-sharp military efficiency. Do not say another word to local law enforcement. Do not answer any questions. We are spinning up immediately. We will have a representative at your arraignment. Thank you, Knox said and hung up. He walked back to his cell, escorted by the deputy. As the heavy door slammed shut again, Knox allowed himself a very small, very grim smile. Officer Harlan and Sergeant Briggs thought they had caught a stray wolf they could kick around for fun. They didn't realize they had just invited the entire pack to their front door. The Ashwood Municipal Courthouse was attached to the police station, a brick building that smelled of old wood polish and anxious sweat. When court convened that morning, the courtroom was packed with the usual docket: petty thefts, traffic violations, drunk and disorderly. Seated in the front row of the gallery, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, were Officer Vance Harlan and Sergeant Rowan Briggs. Harlan was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. He loved arraignment mornings. He loved watching the people he had arrested shuffle in wearing orange jumpsuits, their bravado stripped away, looking to the judge for mercy. Wonder if our fake Navy SEAL is going to cry when the judge denies bail, Harlan chuckled, leaning over to Briggs. Briggs took a sip of his coffee. Just make sure you have your testimony straight, Vance. The resisting charge is solid, but the burglary link is thin. Doesn't matter, Harlan waved him off. He's a nobody. Public defender will plead him out to disorderly conduct. He'll take probation, and we get a conviction stat. Easy money. At the front of the room, the bailiff stood up. All rise. The Honorable Judge Elena Davies presiding. Judge Davies, a stern woman in her late 50s with sharp features and a no-nonsense reputation, took the bench. She adjusted her glasses, opened the thick file folder in front of her, and began calling cases. For the first hour, the routine played out exactly as Harlan expected. Deals were made, fines were levied, court dates were set. Then the bailiff read the next name. Case number 44-092, State of Virginia versus Knox Whitaker. Charges: resisting arrest, failure to comply with a lawful order, and suspicion of burglary. The heavy wooden door leading to the holding cells opened. Knox Whitaker walked in. He was wearing the standard-issue bright orange county jail uniform. His hands were shackled in front of him, the chain connecting to a belly band. Despite the chains, despite the ridiculous color of the uniform, he didn't shuffle. He walked with a measured, predatory grace, his spine perfectly straight. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at the gallery. He looked dead ahead, stopping exactly at the defense table. Harlan nudged Briggs. Look at him. Still thinks he's a tough guy. Judge Davies looked down at her file, then peered over her glasses at Knox. Mr. Whitaker, you are appearing today without representation. Given the severity of the charges, I strongly advise you to request a public defender. Before Knox could speak, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. The murmur of the courtroom instantly died. Striding down the center aisle was a woman in a pristine, perfectly pressed Navy service dress blue uniform. The gold oak leaf of a lieutenant commander gleamed on her collar, and the JAG Corps insignia was pinned above her left breast pocket. Her black heels clicked sharply, rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She carried a slim black leather briefcase. Harlan frowned, sitting up straighter in his chair. What the hell is this? He whispered. The JAG officer walked straight past the gallery, past the wooden divider, and stopped beside Knox. She turned to the judge. Good morning, Your Honor. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ramirez, United States Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. I am formally entering my appearance as defense counsel for Chief Petty Officer Knox Whitaker. Judge Davies blinked, clearly taken aback. She looked from the immaculate naval officer to the man in the orange jumpsuit. Commander Ramirez, this is a municipal court. The defendant is a civilian facing state charges. With respect, Your Honor, the defendant is not a civilian, Commander Ramirez stated, her voice projecting clearly to the very back of the room. Chief Petty Officer Whitaker is an active duty member of the United States Navy, specifically attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He is federal property, and his arrest last night was not only entirely without merit, but it represents a gross violation of his civil rights and interference with federal military readiness. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. In the front row, Harlan's smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden cold weight in his stomach. Briggs sat frozen, his coffee cup suspended halfway to his mouth. Naval Special Warfare, Judge Davies repeated, her tone shifting. She looked down at the arresting officer's report. The arresting officer's notes indicate that the defendant was carrying a forged military identification card. Commander Ramirez reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She approached the bench and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. Enclosed, Your Honor, are Chief Whitaker's verified service records, his active duty status confirmation directly from the Pentagon, and an affidavit from his command verifying that the identification card seized by Officer Harlan is in fact authentic. Ramirez paused, turning slightly to cast a withering glare at Harlan and Briggs. An identification card that, I might add, is federal property and was illegally confiscated. Judge Davies broke the seal on the envelope and quickly scanned the documents. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the service record. She looked back up at Knox, the annoyance in her eyes entirely replaced by a sudden, profound respect. "Officer Harlan," Judge Davies said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy level. "Stand up." Harlan swallowed hard, his legs trembling slightly as he stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Your report states you pulled the defendant over for suspicion of burglary. You then state he became combative and produced a fake ID. I am currently holding a document signed by the Department of Defense confirming this man is a highly decorated Navy SEAL." Judge Davies leaned forward over the bench. "Would you like to explain to me how a Tier 1 military operator returning from a classified deployment ended up in my courtroom in shackles because of your traffic stop?" Your Honor, he fit the description," Harlan stammered, his face turning pale. "And the ID looked fake to me. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Commander Ramirez interrupted smoothly, "does not include violating the Fourth Amendment, Officer Harlan. Nor does it include mocking a decorated veteran and tossing a federal ID onto the floor of your cruiser." "That's a lie," Harlan blurted out, panic setting in. "He's making that up." "Is he?" Ramirez asked calmly. "Your Honor, I have already submitted a preservation order for the dash cam and body cam footage from Officer Harlan's cruiser, as well as the audio recordings from the booking room. I expect those to be surrendered to federal investigators by the end of the day." Harlan felt the blood drain completely from his face. He looked at Briggs, but the older sergeant had shrunk down in his seat, desperately trying to become invisible. The body cam footage, Harlan had forgotten to turn it off during the arrest. Every insult, the rough handling, the dismissal of the ID, it was all on tape. Judge Davies slammed her file shut. "I am releasing the defendant immediately on his own recognizance. And I am issuing an order for the Ashwood Police Department to return all of Chief Whitaker's personal property this instant." She glared at Harlan. "Officer, I suggest you retain a very good attorney, because it appears you have just stepped on a landmine." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ramirez said. But the drama was far from over. As the bailiff stepped forward to unlock Knox's handcuffs, a deep, rhythmic rumbling vibrated through the floorboards of the courthouse. It was a heavy, mechanized sound, growing louder by the second. Outside the courthouse windows, the street was suddenly blocked off. Two dark green military Humvees had pulled up directly onto the curb, their heavy tires crushing the manicured grass. Behind them, a sleek black Chevrolet Suburban with government plates parked squarely in the middle of the street, blocking traffic in both directions. The courtroom doors opened once again, and this time the silence that fell over the room was absolute, suffocating in its intensity. Two heavily armed Navy Master-at-Arms personnel stepped into the room, scanning the crowd with professional, unblinking eyes. They took positions on either side of the doorway. Following them was a man who seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He wore a perfectly tailored Navy service dress blue uniform. The sleeves of his jacket were thick with gold braiding, and a brilliant array of ribbons covered his chest. Above the ribbons was the gold trident of a Navy SEAL. But it was the 3 silver stars gleaming on his collar that made every police officer in the room break out in a cold sweat. Vice Admiral Garrett Sterling had arrived. He didn't walk. He advanced. He moved with the undeniable authority of a man who commanded fleets, who authorized strikes that changed the geopolitical map, and who viewed the men under his command as his own sons. His face was weathered, his eyes a piercing, stormy gray that locked immediately onto the man in the orange jumpsuit. Sterling walked past the gallery, ignoring the shocked gasps and whispers. He stopped at the wooden divider right behind Officer Harlan, who was still standing, frozen in terror. Sterling didn't even look at the cop. He looked directly at Knox. "Chief Whitaker," Admiral Sterling said, his voice deep, gravelly, and echoing with command. Knox immediately snapped his heels together. Even in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, his posture locked into a rigid, perfect position of attention. Admiral Sterling looked at the heavy chains binding Knox's wrists. He looked at the orange fabric. Then slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his head and looked at Officer Vance Harlan. "Are you the individual?" Admiral Sterling asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Who put my chief in chains?" The karma hadn't just arrived, it had brought a fleet. The silence in the Ashwood Municipal Courthouse was no longer just quiet. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the lungs of every civilian and police officer in the room. The air conditioning hummed, a pitifully weak sound against the sheer radiating authority of Vice Admiral Garrett Sterling. Officer Vance Harlan, who had strutted into the courtroom earlier, feeling like the king of his small, miserable kingdom, now looked like a man standing on the gallows, watching the lever being pulled. His mouth opened and closed silently, his vocal cords paralyzed by the icy, unblinking glare of the three-star admiral. "I asked you a question, officer." Admiral Sterling's voice rumbled, soft, but carrying the lethal promise of an incoming artillery strike. "Are you the man who placed Chief Petty Officer Knox Whitaker in those chains?" I... Harlan swallowed violently, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked desperately at Judge Elena Davies, then at his partner, Sergeant Briggs, who had sunk so low in his chair he was practically under the wooden barrier. Finding no lifeline, Harlan choked out, "Yes, sir." Sterling's eyes narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. "I am a vice admiral in the United States Navy, officer. You will address me as admiral." "Yes, admiral," Harlan whispered, his face completely drained of blood. Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned his attention to the bench, his posture perfectly rigid. "Judge Davies, I apologize for the disruption to your courtroom. However, I am here under the authority of the Department of Defense. Chief Petty Officer Whitaker holds a top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearance. He is a critical asset to national security. The fact that local law enforcement detained him, ignored his federal identification, and held him in a municipal cell without immediately notifying the military is a catastrophic breach of protocol. And the fact that they did it based on his race is a stain on the uniform they wear." Judge Davies, who had presided over Ashwood for years and thought she had seen every flavor of human stupidity, looked utterly appalled. She pointed a trembling finger at the bailiff. "Bailiff, remove those shackles this instant. Get those chains off that man." The bailiff, a heavy-set man in his 50s, practically sprinted across the well of the courtroom. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the heavy belly chain and the tight steel cuffs. The metal clattered loudly to the hardwood floor. Knox rubbed his wrists slowly. Deep red grooves were permanently etched into his dark skin where the metal had bitten in for hours. Yet his expression remained perfectly neutral. He rolled his shoulders, stood at attention, and locked eyes with his commanding officer. "Chief Whitaker," Admiral Sterling said, the steel in his voice softening just a fraction, a micro-expression of profound respect passing between the two warriors. "Are you fit for duty?" "Always, Admiral," Knox replied, his voice calm, deep, and steady. "Good." Sterling turned back to Harlan. "Because the men you arrested thought they could break a man who has endured interrogations that would make them weep for their mothers. They thought they were predators. They are about to find out they are prey." Lieutenant Commander Elena Ramirez stepped forward, opening her black leather briefcase once more. "Your Honor, if I may, to compound the egregiousness of this arrest, I have just received an urgent transmission from the Virginia State Police, coordinated through our JAG investigators." Ramirez pulled out a crisp, single-page printout and handed it to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Officer Harlan's sworn arrest report states that he pulled over Chief Whitaker because his vehicle matched the description of a suspect fleeing a burglary in neighboring Franklin County, Ramirez stated, her voice ringing out crisp and clear. Your Honor, the document you are holding is the official dispatch log from Franklin County. The burglary in question occurred earlier that night. The suspect was apprehended hiding in a shed behind the property hours earlier. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. Judge Davies's eyes widened as she read the paper. Ramirez turned slowly to look at Harlan, delivering the final, crushing blow. Chief Whitaker was pulled over by Officer Harlan hours after the burglary suspect was already in a jail cell. Furthermore, the apprehended suspect is a 54-year-old Caucasian male driving a rusted 1998 Honda Civic. Chief Whitaker is a 32-year-old black man driving a pristine 2018 Ford F-150. Judge Davies slowly lowered the paper. The look she gave Officer Harlan could have melted lead. Officer Harlan, she said, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered fury. You profiled a motorist, initiated an illegal traffic stop, fabricated probable cause, destroyed federal property, and then committed perjury on a sworn police report to cover your tracks. Harlan was visibly trembling now, tears of panic welling in his eyes. Your Honor, I made a mistake. It was dark, I thought. You thought you could get away with it? Judge Davies snapped, slamming her gavel down so hard the handle cracked. This court will not tolerate rogue officers using their badges to terrorize innocent citizens, and we certainly will not tolerate the abuse of our nation's decorated service members. She pointed her gavel directly at Harlan. Bailiff, take Officer Vance Harlan into custody. I am holding him in direct contempt of court, and I am recommending immediate charges of perjury, filing a false police report, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Harlan let out a strangled gasp as the bailiff grabbed him by the arm, the exact same way Harlan had grabbed Knox hours earlier. Wait, no! You can't do this! Briggs! Harlan shrieked, looking desperately at his veteran partner. Briggs! Tell them! Tell them we thought he was the guy. Sergeant Rowan Briggs stood up, his face pale, his hands raised in surrender. Your Honor, I swear I was just the passenger. I told Vance to just write a ticket and let him go. I had nothing to do with this. He went rogue. Karma had come full circle. The brotherhood of the badge, the thin blue line Harlan had hidden behind, dissolved instantly in the face of absolute, undeniable consequences. Save it for the federal investigators, Sergeant, Ramirez said coldly. We have the dash cam audio. You are an accessory. As Harlan was dragged, kicking and pleading, toward the same holding cells Knox had just vacated, Admiral Sterling stepped up to Knox. The Admiral ignored the chaos of the courtroom. He reached out and firmly grasped Knox's shoulder. Let's get you out of this orange rag, Chief, Sterling said quietly. Your gear is waiting, and we have a lot of work to do. The air outside the Ashwood Municipal Courthouse smelled of wet asphalt and ozone, a storm having just broken over the Virginia hills. The two military Humvees idled aggressively on the curb, their heavy diesel engines purring like caged beasts. A crowd of locals had already gathered on the sidewalks, cell phones out, filming the unprecedented display of federal power that had descended upon their sleepy town. Knox Whitaker walked out the heavy glass double doors. He was no longer wearing the humiliating county orange. Commander Ramirez had brought a freshly pressed set of Navy working uniform NWU Type 3 camouflage. His gold chief's anchors gleamed on his collar, and the sealed trident was pinned securely to his chest. His heavy Garmin tactical watch was back on his wrist. He looked like exactly what he was, a lethal, disciplined operator. Following closely behind him were Admiral Sterling, Commander Ramirez, and a very breathless, deeply panicked man in a heavily starched white shirt, Chief Desmond Harrison of the Ashwood Police Department. Chief Harrison had been pulled out of a mayoral breakfast meeting when his phone exploded with calls about the Navy invading his courthouse. Admiral Sterling, please, I beg you to understand, Chief Harrison pleaded, practically jogging to keep up with the Admiral's long strides. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. This is an isolated incident. Officer Harlan is a bad apple, a rookie who let his ego get the better of him. The Ashwood Police Department has the utmost respect for the military. We support the troops. Admiral Sterling stopped dead in his tracks at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He turned slowly, towering over the portly police chief. Support the troops, Sterling repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Is that what you call it, Chief Harrison? Because from where I am standing, your department's version of supporting the troops involves dragging a decorated war hero out of his vehicle in the middle of the night, insulting his service, snapping his federal identification in half, and throwing him in a freezing concrete box to rot. I assure you, Admiral, Harlan will be fired immediately. Stripped of his badge, he'll never work in law enforcement again. Harrison babbled, desperate to contain the radioactive fallout. You are damn right he will never work in law enforcement again. A new voice interrupted. A black Ford Explorer with tinted windows screeched to a halt right behind the Humvees. The doors opened and 3 men in sharp, dark suits stepped out. The lead man, sporting silver hair and a stern, weathered face, flashed a gold badge clipped to his belt. Special Agent Marcus Lynch, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Richmond Field Office, the man announced, walking directly up to Chief Harrison. Commander Ramirez contacted us hours ago. We are officially opening a federal civil rights probe into the Ashwood Police Department under 18 U.S. Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Chief Harrison looked like he was going to pass out. Agent Lynch, please. The FBI doesn't need to get involved. We can handle this internally. Your Internal Affairs Division is a joke, Harrison. Agent Lynch cut him off ruthlessly. We've been quietly monitoring your department for months after a string of complaints regarding racial profiling on the highway. You've been using that road as a cash register, pulling over minorities and out-of-state plates to fund your municipal budget. But today your boys pulled over the wrong damn man. Agent Lynch turned to Knox, extending his hand. Chief Whitaker, it is an honor to meet you, sir. I deeply apologize on behalf of federal law enforcement that you had to endure this in your own backyard. Knox shook the agent's hand firmly. Thank you, Agent Lynch. I just want to go home. You will, Chief, Admiral Sterling said gently. But first, there is one last piece of business. Sterling turned back to Chief Harrison, who was now trembling visibly. I want to be unequivocally clear, Chief Harrison. I do not care about your apologies. I do not care about your public relations spin. I command men who jump out of perfectly good aircraft at 30,000 feet in the dead of night to eliminate the enemies of this nation. They endure unimaginable hardships so that people like you can sleep safely in your beds. Sterling took a step closer, invading Harrison's personal space, his eyes burning with a righteous, terrifying fire. When my men come home, they are supposed to be safe. They are supposed to be respected. Chief Whitaker survived multiple combat deployments. He survived ambushes in the Korengal Valley. He should not have to survive a drive to his own house in Virginia because your officers cannot see past the color of his skin. Sterling pointed a rigid finger at the courthouse doors. You will surrender all body cam footage, dash cam footage, dispatch logs, and radio transcripts to the FBI immediately. If I find out that a single second of tape has been deleted or a single document shredded, I will personally see to it that you are charged with obstruction of justice. The United States Navy is not going to let this go. We are going to bury you in so much federal litigation your town won't see daylight for a decade. Yes, Admiral, Harrison stuttered, utterly broken. Full cooperation, whatever you need. Get out of my sight. Sterling dismissed him with a look of pure disgust as Harrison scurried back toward the police station, flanked by the two junior FBI agents. Admiral Sterling turned to Knox. The anger in the Admiral's face vanished, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. He stopped, squared his shoulders, and slowly, deliberately snapped a crisp military salute. It was a staggering breach of protocol. Admirals do not salute enlisted men first, but it was a profound gesture of respect, an acknowledgement of the injustice Knox had suffered. "Chief Whitaker," Admiral Sterling said loudly, ensuring everyone in the crowd could hear. "On behalf of the United States Navy and on behalf of a nation that failed you last night, I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies. You deserved better, and I swear to you, we will make this right." Knox, standing tall in his uniform, the morning sun catching the gold of his trident, returned the salute flawlessly. "Thank you, Admiral." "Go home, Knox," Sterling said softly, dropping his hand. "Take the week. That's a direct order. We'll handle the garbage disposal here." Knox turned and walked toward the waiting black Suburban. The nightmare was over. But for Officer Vance Harlan, Sergeant Rowan Briggs, and the corrupt system that had enabled them, the nightmare had just begun. The karma had arrived. It was wearing a suit, carrying a badge, and backed by the full, crushing might of the United States military. The dismantling of the Ashwood Police Department did not happen slowly. It happened with the terrifying mechanized efficiency of a military strike. Within days of Knox Whitaker walking out of the municipal courthouse, Special Agent Marcus Lynch and a small army of forensic accountants, cybercrime specialists, and civil rights investigators from the FBI's Richmond field office descended upon the precinct. They didn't knock. They served federal no-knock warrants, walking right past the stunned desk sergeants and taping off entire sections of the building with yellow crime scene tape. Chief Desmond Harrison's desperate promise to handle things internally evaporated the moment Agent Lynch's cyber team seized the department's main servers. In a twist of sheer panicked stupidity, Harrison had attempted to log into the administrative portal in the middle of the night after the arraignment to mass delete body cam footage from recent months. He didn't realize that the FBI had already mirrored the entire server farm remotely an hour prior. Harrison's panicked keystrokes weren't a cover-up. They were an electronically signed confession to obstruction of justice, time-stamped and IP traced directly to his home computer. Meanwhile, inside the federal holding facility in Alexandria, former officer Vance Harlan was rapidly discovering that his small-town swagger had absolutely zero currency. He was stripped of his badge, his gun, and his freedom, trading his polyester uniform for a drab federal jumpsuit. His initial arrogance had morphed into a frantic, hyperventilating terror. Harlan used his phone calls to contact every high-powered defense attorney in the state. Every single one turned him down the moment they heard the names Vice Admiral Garrett Sterling and Naval Special Warfare. The line invariably went dead. No lawyer with half a brain was going to stand in front of a jury and try to defend a racist rogue cop who had illegally shackled a decorated Tier 1 operator. Harlan was ultimately assigned a deeply exhausted federal public defender who took one look at the case file and advised him to plead guilty to save himself from a maximum sentence. Harlan, still clinging to his delusions, refused. The dam truly broke several days into the investigation. Sergeant Rowan Briggs, sweating profusely in a windowless FBI interrogation room, realized that the thin blue line he had protected for 20 years was a rapidly sinking ship. Sitting across from him were Agent Lynch and Lieutenant Commander Elena Ramirez, who was observing as a liaison for the Department of Defense. "I'm looking at 30 years of pension, Tom," Lynch said, tossing a thick, heavily redacted file onto the metal table. "And I'm looking at dash cam footage of you standing by while your rookie commits 3 federal felonies. But that's just that night. We've been digging into the last few years. We found the text messages. We found the phishing quotas." Briggs swallowed hard. his eyes darting to Commander Ramirez, whose face was a mask of cold, judicial fury. "The fishing quotas," he croaked. "Don't play dumb," Lynch snapped. "You and Harlan had a game. You called it Friday night fishing, pulling over out-of-state plates and minority drivers on the highway, using fake traffic infractions to search vehicles for cash to seize under civil asset forfeiture. We have the impound logs. You were funding the department's new cruisers by robbing civilians at gunpoint." Lynch leaned forward, the harsh overhead light reflecting off his silver hair. "Harrison is going down for obstruction. Harlan is going to federal prison for a very, very long time. You are currently the only man in this room who can still choose which side of the bars he sleeps on tonight. You flip on Harlan. You testify to the culture of corruption Harrison fostered, and I'll talk to the U.S. Attorney about immunity for the civil rights charges, but your badge is gone today." Briggs looked at his hands. He was in his early 50s. The thought of surviving a federal penitentiary as an ex-cop was a death sentence. The karma he had avoided for 2 decades had finally caught up, and it was demanding its toll. "Give me the paper," Briggs whispered, tears of profound defeat welling in his eyes. "I'll tell you everything." Harlan thought he was untouchable. He hated the military guys coming through town. Thought they looked down on him because he had washed out of Marine Corps boot camp. Commander Ramirez's eyes narrowed. That was the psychological twist. Harlan's irrational hostility toward Knox wasn't just racial profiling. It was rooted in a deep, pathetic insecurity. He had tried and failed to earn the uniform he so casually disrespected. The investigation became a slaughterhouse. With Briggs's recorded confession, the Justice Department filed a massive, sweeping indictment. It wasn't just Harlan anymore. Chief Harrison was arrested in his driveway by armed federal agents in front of his neighbors. 3 other Ashwood officers were suspended pending federal review. The small, corrupt fiefdom was burning to the ground, and the fire was visible from Washington, D.C. Months later, the federal courthouse in Richmond, Virginia, felt less like a hall of justice and more like a military tribunal. The trial of the United States versus Vance Harlan had become a national spectacle. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity, but it wasn't the press that made Harlan's blood run cold as he sat at the defense table. It was the gallery. The first 3 rows directly behind the prosecution were a sea of pristine, Navy service dress blue uniforms. Dozens of active duty SEALs, master-at-arms, and JAG officers sat in absolute, terrifying silence. They didn't whisper. They didn't fidget. They simply stared at the back of Harlan's head, an immovable wall of brotherhood and lethal discipline. In the center of the front row sat Vice Admiral Garrett Sterling, his face carved from granite. Knox Whitaker sat at the prosecution's table as the star witness. He wore his uniform, his chest heavy with the medals he had earned in the blood and dust of foreign lands. The trial was a masterclass in legal destruction. The federal prosecutor, guided by the tactical precision of Commander Ramirez, dismantled Harlan piece by piece. They played the dash cam footage, the audio of Harlan calling Knox "boy," the sickening sound of the federal ID snapping. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Harlan mocked the very concept of naval special warfare. When Harlan took the stand in his own defense, a Hail Mary passed by his desperate lawyer. It was a disaster. He tried to play the victim, claiming he was intimidated by Knox's size and feared for his life. The prosecutor simply walked up to the podium, clicked a remote, and projected a still frame from the body cam onto the large screen. It showed Knox, hands placed passively on the steering wheel, speaking calmly and respectfully. "Mr. Harlan," the prosecutor asked smoothly, "you claim you feared for your life. Yet in this exact moment, Chief Whitaker is informing you of his movements to ensure your safety. He is complying with every order. The only person escalating the situation, the only person using profanity, and the only person drawing a weapon is you. Is it not true that you targeted Chief Whitaker because you felt inadequate after failing out of basic training and you wanted to humiliate a man who succeeded where you failed? Harlan's face flushed crimson. "Objection!" his lawyer cried. "Withdrawn," the prosecutor said, smiling coldly. The damage was done. The jury had seen the truth. Harlan wasn't a protector of the peace. He was a fragile, dangerous bully who had hidden behind a piece of tin. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, the words echoed like a final, fatal gunshot in the quiet room. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant Vance Harlan guilty. On the charge of falsifying a federal document, guilty. On the charge of perjury, guilty. Federal Judge Arthur Pendleton, a man known for his merciless sentencing of corrupt officials, looked down at Harlan. "Mr. Harlan, you have disgraced the badge you wore," Judge Pendleton said, his voice booming through the sound system. "You took a man who has bled for this country, a man of impeccable character, and you subjected him to a nightmare born of your own prejudice and malice. You are a coward who abused the power entrusted to you by the public." Pendleton banged his gavel. "I sentence you to 180 months in federal prison, to be served consecutively, without the possibility of early parole, 15 years. Harlan collapsed into his chair, sobbing uncontrollably, his hands covering his face. No one in the gallery moved. The seals simply stood up in unison, perfectly synchronized, and filed out of the courtroom. The message had been sent, and the karma was absolute. Shortly after, the town of Ashwood formally settled a sweeping civil lawsuit brought by Knox Whitaker for millions. The police department was placed under a federal consent decree, completely overhauled by the Department of Justice, and Chief Harrison pleaded guilty to obstruction, earning himself years in a minimum security facility. Knox didn't keep a single cent of the settlement. One crisp morning, he walked into the headquarters of the Navy SEAL Foundation in Virginia Beach and quietly handed over a cashier's check for the entire amount. He didn't ask for a photo op. He didn't want a plaque. He simply wanted the money to go to the families of the brothers he had lost overseas. That evening, Knox sat on the porch of his cabin in Ashwood. The rain had passed, leaving the Virginia air smelling of pine and damp earth. His Ford F-150 was parked in the driveway, gleaming under the twilight sky. He took a sip of black coffee, looking out over the quiet woods. The storm had come. It had raged and it had broken against the unbreakable wall of his discipline. He was exactly where he belonged, at peace, at home, and ready for whatever mission came next. The ordeal of Chief Petty Officer Knox Whitaker serves as a profound testament to the unyielding power of discipline over chaos and truth over malice. When confronted by the absolute worst of domestic authority, men cloaked in badges but driven by prejudice and fragile egos, Knox relied on the very training that had kept him alive in the world's most unforgiving combat zones. He did not break. He calculated. The ensuing retribution wasn't an act of vengeance, but the magnificent, crushing weight of justice, course-correcting a broken system. It reminds us that true strength is not found in volume or violence, but in the quiet dignity of a person who knows exactly who they are. The karma that decimated the corrupt Ashwood Police Department was a stark warning. Those who misuse their power to terrorize the honorable will eventually find themselves facing a force they cannot comprehend, let alone defeat.